Premium content, stunning 3D visuals, and powerful stories that you have truly never heard before. Give us just 20 seconds to completely change your view of the world around you. Hit that subscribe button and start your experience. The moment I heard the crystal glass chime 3 times, I knew exactly what was coming. I had been waiting for it, actually. Deciding precisely how the muscles in my face would arrange themselves when my sister-in-law stood up in front of 140 wedding guests and destroyed 11 years of my marriage in a single breath. What she hadn't rehearsed was what I would do next. The reception hall at Hargrove Estate was everything my husband's family believed themselves to be: vaulted ceilings, ivory draping, centerpieces that cost more than my first car. My brother-in-law's wedding to his college sweetheart had become, predictably, a Whitmore family performance. Every detail curated. Every guest selected. Every seating arrangement a quiet statement about who mattered and who was merely tolerated. I had been tolerated for 11 years. I stood near the far end of the head table in a dress the color of deep burgundy, holding a glass of sparkling water because I hadn't touched alcohol in 3 years, a fact my sister-in-law had used against me once, whispering to relatives that I was probably hiding a problem. My husband stood 2 seats away, laughing at something his college friend had said, his hand loose around a whiskey glass. He looked relaxed. Happy. Entirely unaware of what his sister was about to do. Or so I believed. Her name was Diana. 44 years old, never married, the kind of woman who treated family gatherings as courtrooms where she served as judge, jury, and chief prosecutor. She had despised me since the day her brother brought me home to Thanksgiving dinner, a 31-year-old middle school art teacher from outside Philadelphia with no family money and no impressive last name. I had committed the unforgivable crime of making her brother genuinely happy in a way that didn't require her approval. She rose from her chair slowly, the way people do when they want the room to notice them. She tapped her glass again. The string quartet at the far end faded politely into silence. "I'd like to say a few words about love," she began. Something cold and deliberate moved through my chest. I set my water glass down very carefully. She talked about her brother first. About how devoted he was. How loyal. How he had always been the kind of man who trusted completely, who gave everything to the people he loved. The guest smiled. His mother dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin. My husband shifted his weight, pleased and a little embarrassed the way men get when their family praises them publicly. Then Diana turned, and her eyes found mine across the table. "Which is why," she said, her voice dropping just enough to make the room lean in, "it breaks my heart to share something I've been struggling with for months." She paused. A practiced pause. The kind that meant she had done this before, in smaller rooms, with smaller audiences, and she had liked the way it felt. "Several people close to our family have come to me over the past year with concerns about my sister-in-law's relationship with her colleague, a man named Patrick Deering. I have photographs. I have text records. And I have a witness who saw them together on a night she told my brother she was visiting her sick aunt in Maryland." The room went absolutely still. 140 people stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. I could hear the faint sound of the catering staff moving behind the kitchen door, oblivious and far away. My husband turned to look at me. And I laughed. Not loudly. Not hysterically. It started somewhere behind my sternum, quiet and certain, and it came out as a slow, almost private exhale of amusement, the way you laugh when someone has told a joke that took a few seconds to land. A sound that was entirely wrong for the moment, which was exactly why I had practiced it. Diana stopped. The room, which had been leaning toward disaster, stumbled sideways into confusion. My husband's expression cracked down the middle. He had been preparing himself for something. I could see that now, the way a man braces before impact. My laugh had interrupted whatever script he had been handed. "I'm sorry," I said, setting my napkin on the table and standing up. My voice was calm. The calmness of someone who has been sitting in the water long enough that the cold no longer registers. "Diana, do you want to tell them what Patrick Deering actually is? Or should I?" She opened her mouth. "He's the private investigator I hired," I said, 18 months ago, "to document what you have been doing to my husband." I should explain the beginning, because the end only makes sense if you understand how long I had been watching. I noticed the first change in my husband about 2 years into our marriage. Small things, the kind that don't announce themselves. He started deflecting conversations about his own career ambitions by referencing what his family thought. He stopped disagreeing with his mother in my presence, not from conflict avoidance. He had never been a conflict-avoidant man, but with a strange, almost rehearsed smoothness, as if disagreement simply wasn't a category that applied to her anymore. We had been happy. I want to be clear about that. My husband was not a weak man or a cruel man. He was funny in the quiet, unexpected way that makes you feel like you've been let in on something private. He remembered small details. He was the kind of father our daughter deserved. Whatever came to exist between us later was not the foundation. The foundation was real, but by year 4, something had been built on top of it. Something I couldn't quite see directly, only catch in reflections. He started spending more time on the phone with Diana. He started describing his own feelings back to me in language that didn't sound like him, precise, almost clinical, like terminology he had absorbed from somewhere and begun to apply. When we argued, which we always had, the arguments started ending differently. Not with resolution. With him arriving at a fixed position and staying there, immovable in a way that felt external, like a wall someone else had constructed in the space where his flexibility used to be. His sister had introduced him to a therapist named Dr. Randall 4 years ago. She presented it as a gift, a resource, an act of love. She covered the cost. She had more money than my husband and had always used that asymmetry with precision. My husband went twice a week. He said it was helping. I believed him for a long time. The thing that finally opened my eyes was not dramatic. It was a Tuesday evening in February, our daughter asleep upstairs, both of us at the kitchen table going over finances. My husband looked up from the laptop and said, with no particular expression, that he had been thinking about moving closer to his family home in Connecticut. We had never discussed this. We had built our life outside of Philadelphia deliberately, carefully, near my work and near the small circle of people who constituted my remaining family. He had been part of those decisions. He had helped make them. I asked him where the idea had come from. He said he had been processing some things and thought it was what he needed. That word processing landed in my stomach like a stone. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and assembled everything I had been refusing to look at directly, and when I finally let myself look, the shape of it was unmistakable. His sister had been quietly, methodically dismantling our life. She had not done it loudly. Diana was too intelligent for loud. She had done it through access to a therapist who reported back to her, to my husband's sense of loyalty, to the particular vulnerability that high-functioning men sometimes carry about their family of origin, the need to remain beloved, to not be cast out. She had done it through years of patient reframing, until my husband's memories of our relationship had been gently repositioned, our conflicts enlarged, my character slowly reconstructed into something smaller and less trustworthy than it actually was. I could have confronted her. I thought about it for approximately 48 hours. Then I thought about what would happen if I did. She would deny it. My husband, whose perception of me had already been carefully adjusted, would see the confrontation as confirmation of the portrait she had painted. I would lose. And losing meant losing my daughter's daily life, my marriage, and 11 years of something that had been, underneath all of it, genuinely worth saving. So I didn't confront her. I hired Patrick Deering instead. Patrick was 62 years old, former Baltimore PD, deeply unimpressed by money or drama, which made him exactly right for the job I needed done. Our first meeting was at a coffee shop near his Wilmington office. He listened without expression, asked 14 precise questions, and then told me that what I was describing, if documented properly, had potential civil and criminal dimensions I should understand before proceeding. He had worked cases involving therapist misconduct before. What Diana had constructed, if it proved out, was textbook undue influence, the systematic manipulation of a person's beliefs and relationships using a licensed professional as the instrument. It was not only a marital issue. It was potentially fraud. It was potentially a violation of professional licensing law. It was, in certain configurations, criminal. I told him I needed to know the full scope of what she had done before I moved in any direction. It took 14 months. Patrick documented Diana's bi-weekly phone calls with Dr. Randall, which should not have been occurring at all given that my husband was Dr. Randall's patient and had not consented to any information sharing. He obtained financial records, through legal channels, showing that Diana had been paying the therapist a substantial monthly retainer on top of the standard session fees. A retainer with no documented professional basis. He spoke to 2 former friends of my husband's who had been progressively frozen out of his life over the past several years. Both of whom described feeling like their access to him had been managed and gradually closed. And he found a woman named Carol. Carol had been married to Diana's cousin for 6 years. She had left him after what she described as a gradual psychological unraveling she had never fully understood until she read an article about coercive control. She had no proof of Diana's involvement. She had only a timeline. And a memory of a therapist her husband's family had strongly encouraged, and the feeling of watching her marriage be disassembled piece by piece while she stood inside it wondering why nothing she said or felt seemed to register anymore. When Patrick showed me Carol's statement, I sat in his office for a long time without speaking. Diana had done this before. She had simply gotten better at it. I want to tell you about the night I came closest to stopping. It was a Saturday in October, about 8 months into the investigation. My husband and I had taken our daughter to a corn maze outside of Doylestown, one of those cool-aired autumn afternoons that feel borrowed from a better version of your life. She was 7. She ran ahead of us through the stalks, screaming with delight at every dead end, and my husband and I walked behind her, not talking much, just watching her, and he reached over and took my hand the way he used to do without thinking about it. He held it for almost 10 minutes. In the car on the way home, our daughter fell asleep in the back seat, and he looked over at me at a red light and said he was glad we came. Said it simply, without subtext, the way the man I married used to speak. I went into the bathroom that night and cried for a long time. Not because I was sad, exactly. Because I could still see him in there. Under everything Diana and Dr. Randall had constructed, the person I had fallen in love with was still present, still occasionally surfacing, like light through water. And I was letting him continue to be slowly altered because the alternative moving too soon, without full documentation, without a strategy that would actually work meant I might lose him entirely. I called Patrick from the parking lot of a grocery store the next morning and told him I needed this done. He told me we were close. 3 weeks before my brother-in-law's wedding. Patrick delivered the final documentation package to the attorney I had retained, a woman named Sandra, who specialized in exactly this intersection of family law and professional misconduct. Sandra had already been in preliminary contact with the Pennsylvania State Board of Social Workers and Counselors. Dr. Randall's license was under review. Sandra had also been in contact with a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit of the Philadelphia DA's office. Because the retainer payments Diana had been making to Dr. Randall, when examined alongside the therapist's session notes which had been subpoenaed and which contained fabricated clinical assessments of me, written at Diana's direction, constituted fraud. Potentially wire fraud, given that some communications had crossed state lines. Diana did not know any of this. She thought she was walking into her brother's wedding reception with a clean hand of cards. She thought I was the woman her brother's therapist had helped construct, diminished, isolated, slightly desperate, unlikely to fight back with anything more coherent than tears. She had been working from an outdated portrait for a very long time. When I said Patrick Deering's name out loud in that reception hall, the silence changed quality. It went from the silence of shock to the silence of recalibration, people trying to reorganize what they thought they understood. Diana's face did something I had never seen it do before. The composure cracked, not loudly, but along every seam at once, the way expensive porcelain does when it meets a concrete floor. That's not, she started. I have his full report, I said. I was not performing calm anymore. I simply was calm, the way the surface of a lake is calm when everything beneath it has already settled. I also have Dr. Randall's subpoenaed session notes, 14 months of your phone records with his office, and 2 years of financial documentation. Sandra, would you like to come in now? Sandra had been in the hotel lobby. She had my husband's full case file in a leather portfolio. She walked through the double doors in a charcoal blazer and sensible heels, and the room moved aside for her the way rooms move for people who are clearly there for a specific purpose. My husband was completely still. I looked at him, not Diana. He was the only person in the room I cared about convincing. She has been paying your therapist, I said, quietly enough that only the people near us could hear. Not as a gift to you. As a retainer. Dr. Randall has been filing clinical reports about me, assessments he never conducted, based on information Diana fed him. Everything you believe you processed in that office, your feelings about our marriage, about me, about what you want, was built on material she provided. You were not in therapy, you were being managed. He looked at Sandra. He looked at the portfolio. He looked at his sister. Diana had recovered enough to speak. You're hysterical, she said. This is insane, you've lost. Diana. Sandra's voice was level and final. I'd recommend not saying anything further without counsel present. The DA's office will be in contact with you on Monday. What happened in the next few minutes is something I still don't fully have language for. The room remained mostly quiet. My mother-in-law made a sound I had never heard from her. My brother-in-law, whose wedding this was supposed to be, stood with his new wife at the edge of the dance floor, looking like two people watching something collapse that they had not known was unstable. My husband sat down in his chair. He sat there for a long time, looking at the table, while the room around him slowly redistributed into smaller conversations, into comfort, into the business of processing something no one had been prepared to process. I did not go to him immediately. That, too, I had thought about carefully. There is a specific kind of cruelty in rushing to reassure someone who has just discovered they were manipulated. It forecloses the space they need to actually feel it. I had learned that from the one therapist I had seen for myself during those 14 months, a woman named Dr. Ali, who had helped me understand that the goal was not to win. The goal was to make it possible for my husband to come back to himself. So I sat in the chair beside him, not touching, not speaking, and I waited. After a long time, he turned and looked at me. How long have you known? He asked. That something was wrong? About 2 years. That it was Diana specifically, and how she'd done it. 14 months. He absorbed that. I watched him work through the math of it, the enormity of it, the particular grief of realizing the duration. Why didn't you tell me? Because the version of you she built would have believed her over me, I said. I needed documentation. I needed it to be undeniable so that you couldn't talk yourself out of it. His jaw moved. He looked back at the table. I pushed you away, he said. In the past 2 years, Yes. I said things to you that I don't actually. I know. He turned to look at me again. And this time something in his face was different, unguarded, genuinely uncertain. Raw in the way that people only are when they have just lost a structure they didn't know they were living inside. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't tell him it was fine, because it wasn't, and he didn't need the absolution of a quick forgiveness. I told him the truth. I know, I said. We're going to need real help. Actual therapy, with someone neither of us knows and neither of our families is paying for. It's going to be hard and it's going to take time, and I can't promise you where we end up, but I can tell you that I stayed because I could still see you, the real you. And I believed it was worth trying to get back to. He was quiet for a moment. Your laugh, he said. When Diana stood up. You laughed. I had been waiting for her to do it. I needed her to do it, actually. In front of witnesses. He let out a long, unsteady breath that was almost a laugh and almost something else entirely. You planned all of this. Every part. He looked at me for a long moment. Not the way he had been looking at me for 2 years, filtered, guarded, slightly constructed. The way he used to look at me when he forgot to manage how he was feeling. I have a lot to figure out, he said. So do I. I told him. Diana was formally charged 11 weeks later, wire fraud and professional misconduct, the latter charge stemming from her documented coordination with Dr. Randall to produce falsified clinical assessments. Randall surrendered his license and reached a civil settlement. Carol, the woman who had been through something similar with Diana's cousin, was contacted by Sandra's office. Her case was reopened. My husband and I are still married. I want to be precise about what that means. Because it doesn't mean we're fine. We spent 3 months living in the same house with the particular awkwardness of two people who are trying to relearn each other's actual edges. He started seeing a new therapist. One we found together, one no family member had any connection to. He came to 2 sessions with me. We are scheduled for a third. There are mornings when he looks at me and I can see him sorting through a memory. Trying to determine which version of it is real, the one he lived. Or the one he was convinced he had lived. That is not a quick process. I had been warned it wouldn't be. But there are also evenings when our daughter falls asleep on the couch between us, and the television is on and neither of us is watching it, and he puts his hand over mine on the armrest. Not as a statement. Not as an apology. Just because it's where his hand goes. I spent 14 months building something that I thought was purely tactical, a case file, a strategy, a mechanism for exposure. What I was actually building, without fully understanding it, was the only path back to a marriage that had been worth saving in the first place. Diana thought she was taking something from me. She thought I was the kind of woman who could be quietly unmade. The thing about people who specialize in tearing things apart is that they rarely account for the ones who are very, very good at building.